Hi, folks, and welcome back for another quite special episode of Riftbound 101. This is episode 31, an episode I'm calling Culture, Color, and Flavor. This episode probably should have come out yesterday, but it took so much more time to prep than I imagined. It kept getting bigger and bigger, and it is by far the biggest amount of information I've had to cram into a video. So who knows how long this one's going to be. But it's going to be a quite in depth discussion about how card games and how Riftbound has designed or have designed culture, how they segment that culture into flavor and colors, and some of the issues that I think the game currently is facing that probably should be ironed out in the next couple of sets. So, yeah, let's get started. The plan today is really going to be to split this into five very broad category topics. And part of what made this video so long to put together is putting together a history of how flavor and culture have been intertwined with games for perhaps as long as we've had games. Then I want to talk about the 1990s with the invention of Magic, and also a little bit of mention of Condottiere, which is a game like an older Euro game that also uses cards. And then I want to talk about what happens to Magic in the 2000s, which leads to a whole wave of games that use cards, and they use them in the way that Magic had by the 2000s, mid 2000s, late 2000s, and especially in the 2010s. And then the final two topics for the day are going to be talking about Runeterra. And I mean this in the broad sense of Runeterra as League of Legends' living world, but also Legends of Runeterra, the card game that existed before Riftbound and that Dave Guskin was lead on for a certain amount of time. And then finally, I'm going to talk about Riftbound. So you might imagine this is going to be an endeavor. let's see. I want to, prep you mentally. This is probably going to be like an hour plus. So get a snack, get something to drink, and sit down because we're going to go on an adventure. So this is something that I do whenever I teach game studies for entry level undergraduates. I ask them, how old is flavor in games? Or really, how old are games for that matter? And I get a range of answers that are going to say, early, 500s or the Middle Ages. And then I move into talking about how old are card games. So if you want, you can pause the video and you can answer these questions for yourself. Because I'm probably going to show you some stuff that you may or may not have heard about. The oldest game that we have on record is actually called Mancala. And the boards that we have, which like we can debate whether they're Mancala or Proto-Mancala, go back as far as 5800 BCE, plus minus about like 250 years, generally from the Jordan region around En Ghazal. But there are also carved boards like the one that you see on the right that were found in Kenya. And Mancala is effectively a game that is about the cycle of seasons, and you move crops or harvests around trying to score points. So it's really a game about teaching agriculture or thinking about agriculture and seasonal cycles. And this is one of the oldest games that we have. I often get into debates with my best friend who also teaches games about how old knucklebones are. I'm probably going to draw some ire from him now because the stuff that I've seen places knucklebones, especially knucklebones based around the use of the talus bone, around 3000 BC in modern day Scotland. So we have things like dice games that are also extremely old. But one of the games, once we start thinking about games that are much more formalized and have game pieces and are, bound by more specific rule sets, we get into what is probably the oldest game that we have on hand called Senet. And Senet to me is incredibly important. Circa 3500 BC in Egypt. For people who want to imagine 3500 BC as like the pre-dynastic periods, this is way before the Old Kingdom. And we get a game about passing. So it's depicting the movement of the soul, the Ka, through the Duat, which is one of the realms of the dead. right? So this is like the inverse to the game of life, and arguably means that for about 5,500 years, people have been making games about spiritual aspects of life. This is also debatably the first formalized game that has like a board, pieces, a box. So, these are all debates, but they're interesting to me in terms of thinking through what we do with games and what the flavor is. And then we have a little bit of a jump. I'm really doing an abridged story because if I was doing something much longer, I should talk about Go as well, and I should talk about woodblock cards in China, but we would be here for like multiple weeks. We get chess, and chess really moves from Persia to the west, but moved into Persia from India, generally called chaturanga originally, then shatrang, and then shah, which, if you're Romanian like me, it's what the game is still called. And Shah also means the Shah, so you might have heard that term going around recently, which means the king. And Shahmat, which is what we still say for checkmate, just means the king is helpless. And so you can think about chess and the original pieces of chess, which were much more related to Middle Eastern and Indian cultural motifs, like instead of having towers, we had elephant troops. The knights were just horse riders, and the rooks, what we call the rooks today, are the ruch, which are mythological birds that move diagonally. So the birds get to move in directions that people don't get to move. And so even games like chess, going as far back as the 7th century, have a lot of flavor about cultural life, and they shift in terms of what they showcase when they move from country to country. Now I'm like going way back, but I want to give you a good sense. And all of this starts to get collected and discussed as a whole around 1283, and with the Libro de los Juegos, the Book of Games, commissioned by Alfonso X of Castile, to be written down. Big fan of games, arguably one of the first gamers. Is a manual that discusses both the function, the professional play and the good moves, and also the flavor of games for a variety of games. So games of chance, dice, tables, which is the precursor to backgammon, and again, if you're Romanian, table is still what we call it, and chess. And so we start getting formalized documentation in Europe about the function of games and what they mean and what we should take from them. Right? So we start thinking of games as legitimate cultural signifiers and artifacts. And not too long after this is when we see the entrance of the Mamluk cards into Europe. And we call them Mamluk because they're part of the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt from the late 13th century, although Mamluks have a much wider context to take care of that I can't speak to in this video. So if you want to look it up, I would suggest doing so because it's a lot of fascinating history. And these are really like the first playing cards the way that we understand them. So there are some recovered sheets of Mamluk playing cards, or sometimes called Moorish playing cards because they enter into Moorish Spain. And they have suits like modern card games do. They don't have hearts, clubs, diamonds, and spades. They have coins, swords, rods, and cups. And the suit in front of you is the cups. And this is an iconic art. So because it comes from an Islamic context, generally we don't see faces. We see patterns and we see objects, right? So you can take a look. On the left is the 8 of cups, right? So then you would know, okay, well, this is like a numbered card, and they have an ordinal numbering from 1 to 10, and they have suits, but instead of having jack or knave and queen and king, we have 2 naibs and then the king, right, or the chieftain. And naib generally means lieutenant or deputy with authority. If there's anybody in here who is a traditional speaker of Arabic, you can correct me. But in general, a lot of these cards work the same way, and they retain a lot of the functions, but the flavor is quite different. And these cards move through Europe largely from North Africa into Barcelona, and then into Catalonia, and then into Florence and Viterbo. So they move south to north, right? So they you're going to see, I think, some prohibitions around these cards in Italy and in Florence, especially as like games of chance that are tied to usury and are not desirable from a Christian standpoint. Also, naibs is a term that has recently found its way back into the media, but was part of the 1970s Dune book series. So a lot of this terminology persists. In Dune, Paul is not a naib, but he goes to the Council of Naibs. So Stilgar is one, right? So chiefs or deputies or lieutenants, depending on how you want to translate it. And these cards circulate around Europe for a while. And eventually, we start to get European playing cards. The oldest known, I think, is the Knave, which is from 1390. And what we see is starting to be like an adaptation of the Mamluk cards into different kinds of cultural signifiers. So European cards move to Italy, they move to Spain, they move to Germany. Eventually, the most famous ones being the Rouen playing cards. And you start to see the change of suits to indicate certain peoples, right? So we have the suits, but we also have characters. And some of these characters are mythological and some are not. So there are cards like I think it's the Jack of Spades is Lancelot, but for certain, we can talk about face cards. For example, like the Queen of Spades, which is meant to be a signifier for Athena. And then eventually, because of certain novels, becomes attached to Natalia Golitsina of Russia. And like the cards are actually people. So when people are playing with these cards, they might or might not know that these cards have certain flavors to them. And certain countries paint the cards different ways. They have styles, and there's like a production of a language, but also an attachment of even more culture to them than there had been in the past. So they lose some of the context, but they gain new context. And this persists today. A piece from 2014 by Nathan Altus that I like to cite a lot, the Playing Card Platform, talks about how playing cards were used, for example, during the Iraq War to attach certain characters in order of importance or seniority as sort of a micro game inside the war on terror and the war in Iraq. So cards have had this kind of like function of attaching ordinal numbers and importance. So from 1 to 10, Jack, Queen, King, and Ace to real people for centuries, if not more. And people are still finding new ways to do that today. Why I mention this is basically to showcase that the discussion of flavor in cards today is actually an incredibly old discussion around culture in games, and games have really always been cultural. They've always been about teaching the young about social norms, about spiritual life or religion, about people around them, about how to accumulate wealth or how to deal with crops. And these games have been engaged with flavor design collectively or individually for as long as they've been around. And this can be explicit or not, right? For example, the decision to attach certain characters to the Rouen playing cards is one of those decisions. But otherwise, things might also happen, unexpectedly. Let's put it that way. In this way, games actually share a lot with another field that I worked in for a while, linguistics. And semiotics. And if you are somebody who's interested in semiotics, which is the study of signs and how signs are produced, there is no better starting point than Ferdinand de Saussure, a Swiss linguist who wrote a general introductory course in linguistics. And this is sort of the first book that's been translated now into English a bunch of times that really discusses the production of language, and especially language in collectivity, right? How people produce new languages together. And I would argue cards are certainly one of those. So Saussure explains that speech is heterogeneous, right? Like the way that we talk is very different. There are dialects, people change use cases, but language is somewhat homogeneous, right? It's a system that has to be fixed, that we understand as attaching unions of a union of meanings and sound images, what he calls sort of like the way a thing sounds tells you a lot. So if I say tree, you can immediately think of a tree. But these are symbolic and psychological attachments, right? I could teach you that tree means something different. It would just be very hard to do so. And effectively, the attachment of images to cards is doing this, right? We are producing a language over time. And in fact, there's like a diffuse language of card design, and then there are multiple micro dialects depending on which game you're in. So, to really talk about modern card games, and I call them modern card games to avoid having to talk about trading card games, living card games, and collectible card games. I talk about them as modern card games because they are modern in their use of imagery and flavor design, and they are different than traditional playing cards, where games tend to not change the game pieces. So games like Jim Rummy or Canasta or Bridge use the same cards, poker as well, for example. So we go back to the 1990s because I think this is really the moment when things start to rapidly shift for how cards are designed. So to my up above me is the skeleton card, and this is one of the first test cards for Magic the Gathering. And so this video is really going to be partially about Magic, because I think there's no way around that as the sort of grandfather of most other new wave card games. And to talk about these card games, we have to talk about Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic. Richard Garfield has gone on to design other games like Keyforge, but he is really the innovator who conceptualized how cards are schematized now. And to do so, there's like a double effect, right? So Garfield thinks of Magic at the onset of Magic as a trading card game. So it's going to be a game that people are going to open packs about, and they're going to collect different game pieces, and they're going to produce decks. So really, it's like if I sold you parts of a language, but you wanted to write a poem or write a text. And the other thing that Richard does is that he creates a color system. So you can see on the back of the Magic card, white, green, blue, red, and black dots. These are the 5 colors of Magic, which are one of its core systems, but also the Deckmaster logo. And Deckmaster is thought of as sort of an imprint where Magic is going to be the fantasy setting, and there's going to be a bunch of different settings that are supposed to be part of Deckmaster. So you get like Portal 3 Kingdoms, and there's supposed to be a sci-fi setting at this time that I think is either based on Netrunner or Cyberpunk. And you get some attachments of images like Crusaders or Goblins, right? So there's like a match of cards as a consumer good to certain kinds of flavor design and a certain kind of language. Now, if you look at some of the test cards for Magic, you can kind of see what's happening, right? Garfield was attaching, much like the images I just showed you, a variety of different phenomena or pop culture characters onto the card surface. So, for example, the proto card for Blessing has the white, the W to indicate the cost of white mana. It's a card that's supposed to enchant a creature, and it has +1 toughness for each white, which at the time, probably meant for each white symbol on cards that you have. And it has the Spock picture, right? So clearly, Garfield is trying to understand certain kinds of card mechanics by thinking about them through flavor, right? Yetis are also part of this. They walk over mountains because they're Yetis, obviously. Hurricane is a large natural phenomena. It hurts things in the air and players. It has like a downpour image. And Starburst looks like a Starburst, right? So this is not like unpredictable change. It's just kind of evident. Like it looks self-evident looking back, but at the time, I think this was a massive leap forward in how we design cards. And one of the people who's talked about this the most is Mark Rosewater. So Garfield designs Magic circa 91, 92. It goes to market in 93. And by 95, Mark Rosewater is working at Magic. And he writes in 2016, Richard Garfield created Magic. He had 3 genius ideas. And this is the golden trifecta. So they're the trading card system. So the fact that you're supposed to buy these cards, trade them, they have a value. The mana system and the color pie. I've talked a little bit about the mana system. That's a resource system, right? So unlike suited cards that have a value from 1 to 10, mana systems or energy systems in Runeterra are a way to cost things. So things that cost more that you have to pay for are bigger, right? So a dragon is larger than a bunny, for example. The color pie is something that I haven't talked about, and I think is really the the core organizing change in modern card games compared to the suits that we have before. So the color pie refers obviously to the 5 colors, but what you can take a look at is something like Lightning Bolt. So Lightning Bolt has a red cost, and it has a very simple function. It deals damage, and it's a red card. So the color pie inherently means that the color red makes cards cost red, and it has certain functions like dealing damage, aggression, damage, speed. These are all things that are high. Recklessness are things that are attached to the color red in Magic. And this is the start of what I would call an industrial language, right? It's a move from the old 4 suit of cards into something quite different. At the same time, if you look at something like Condottiere, which is a game about princes and deputies, not unlike naibs, moving around Italy, what you see is a different kind of instance of trying to evolve games from the suit versions. So you have, your suited cards that have values, but you also have cards with functions like the key, the cross, the dove, and the star. Not that you need to know what these are, just to indicate that this is a different kind of movement where we start experimenting not only with different suits, but with different functions for cards. So these two things are happening at the same time. I don't think it's such a coincidence that the first country that Magic expands into is Italy, with L'Oscurità, the Dark, that Sam from Ristic Studies has talked about quite in detail. And this all happens around Lucca, which is one of the towns most dedicated to board games in the world, in Italy. So what I want to talk about is this sort of like general move away from the 4 suits. Wizards, where Richard is also working at the time, then starts working with Upper Deck, and we also get the Pokemon trading card game, which also has different colors and energies and different systems. And this really sets up the stage for the 2000s. I think if you look at like the 90s, like a test incubator, you sort of start understanding what's about to happen to cards and, knock-on effects that we have today. So in the 2000s, we are firmly in the era where Mark Rosewater is now the lead designer, head designer, custodian of Magic, right? He is the person who, since 95, has nominally been the face of Magic, I would say, and really shepherded the company and done an enormous amount of archival work. But there's also Matt Cavada, who at the time was working a lot on flavor design in Magic around 2003 to 5. And Cavada comes up with this instantiation of the color pie. So not only are we going to have colors, but the colors are going to represent abstract concepts. So if you look at the color white, white represents morality, order, peace, law, whereas something like the color black is about amorality. It's about oppression. It's about selfishness. And then you're going to have colors that are not so morally inclined, like green, which are about instinct or interdependence between the natural world. So you start to get a very intense thought process about what the colors of cards are supposed to tell players about the game and about the characters that are in the game. So if I make a character red, it tells you certain things about what that character believes or who they are. This is actually so formally important to Magic that Magic has what's called the Council of Colors. So this is a body of employees who adjudicate what belongs in what color. But this is all philosophical, aesthetic, and very high concept. However, what happens here is that you sort of start to get a formalization of what Garfield was working on in the 90s, right? Cavada puts this out as like a style guide, and you understand what you need to fit where, if you're an artist and if you're a designer. And then I have to talk about Rosewater. Rosewater, who I just mentioned, is really kind of the core or key thinker about how Magic should work. And I would advance, it's no coincidence that Mark Rosewater is a communication studies graduate like me. He graduates in the 90s in California. He works on Roseanne for a year or two, writing for TV. And then he brings a lot of that sensibility towards literature, towards movies and TV and other games into how he designs cards, or how he would like cards to be designed. Rosewater has gone on to write a ton about the color pie, and he really differentiates the aesthetic color pie that Kawada was talking about from the mechanical color pie. So these colors have things that they do. So it's not only that they have certain values, but they have functions. And not only do they have functions, but the functions are tiered. So there's an importance. So for example, the color white has primary functions, like it produces small units. And then it might have a secondary function, like it has units that fly, like birds. And then its tertiary function might be cards that emulate laws, right? And this happens for every mechanic, every type of unit, every card is segmented into the system that is effectively it's a language, right? I think he has referred to it on occasion as Magicese, which I would agree with. I think it's fully uh, in that space. And much like real language in the semiotic sense, card languages change over time. So cards have become less controversial over time, depending on what color boundaries they push. Colors have changed, they've widened, and they've been applied to new concepts or new locales. To be clear about this, Rosewater does like a redux every couple of years. So he had a mechanical color pie article from 2017, and then he wrote articles about each individual color and how those worked. He then wrote reduxes. He wrote articles about every single color pair, color trio. Then he wrote articles where each color trio was anthropomorphized and talked about what their values were and also what characters go where. And so you also start to see the game change around this, right? For example, that Christopher Rush lightning bolt becomes Christopher Muller's lightning bolt, which is now red because it's in the color red. So aesthetically, it should match that color some more. But you also get a definition of archetypes across characters. Like the Titan cards are very easily identifiable by colors. I don't really need to tell you which one is the green Titan and which one is the red one. Or the white one, or the blue one, or the black one. You can probably figure it out visually. So the colors become very formalized in how they work and how they look. And at the same time, Magic starts going to different planes of existence or different worlds, which are culturally inflected. We get Avishkar, or formerly Kaladesh, the Indian filigree world on the left, or the mythological Theros, the Greek set on the right. And then from top to bottom, we have Amonkhet, the Egyptian world, Innistrad, the Eastern European Gothic world, and Kamigawa, the Japanese spirit world that goes from being sort of medieval or warring states spirituality, like Shinto spirituality, all the way to future cyberpunk. So not only are colors being developed in this period, but worlds are being developed. And at the overlap, you're going to get, for example, what does red look like in each of these worlds? So, what I want to say, and what I have written about, because this is one of my quotes, is that effectively what Rosewater develops over the period of 30 years, along with the people who are working with him, is an entire dialect of card design, a language that can accommodate anything like Tarzan or King Kong, but entire cultures wholesale into the color schema. And he writes about this across dozens of articles. He has more than 38 podcast episodes, dozens of hours with his Drive to Work series. He's talked to other lead designers. Like, this is incredibly documented and really over 140 card sets that he has touched in some way. I think like the quote I have right after this is that effectively going through this is an archival project that even in my doctoral dissertation, I didn't have time to go through. This is insane. Somebody made a language. I don't know how else to explain that like more clearly. Obviously, he's iterating on a lot of the concepts that Richard Garfield has had, but Garfield had to design a handful of sets, not 140 of them. And obviously now there are certain hiccups with how Magic is run today, and the fact that there are a lot more different IPs that are coming into Magic. The Tarzan and King Kong comments are kind of jokey, but kind of not when you look at the fact that we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Avatar and Spider-Man and Warhammer 40k and a range of other adaptations that are coming into the game. This very quickly starts to bleed into other companies. So if you look at something like Fantasy Flight Games, producers of the Lord of the Rings card game and the Android Netrunner game, which was the IP was licensed from Wizards of the Coast for a very long time before it was pulled back, you start to see this kind of design. If you look at their Arkham Horror game, which you can't really see, but I have like every box next to me, Arkham Horror effectively adapts the horror novels or short stories of H.P. Lovecraft and creates a card game, cooperative card game, where you get to play across 5 colors: Rogue, Seeker, Survivor, Guardian, and Mystic. And all of these have values, they have colors, there's design attached to them, right? We are still in that like 5-color design. You also get this with newer games like Marvel Champions, where you get the aspects: aggression, justice, leadership, and protection, that also have colors. And more recently, you get this with Star Wars Unlimited, where the game is quite clearly telling you that there are 6 colors, and they attach to certain characters. So something like Cloud City, which is tied to cunning, is a neutral place. But then something like heroism and vigilance are attached to Luke, right? And we can talk about like Boba or Darth Vader. But the thing remains that FFG has sort of continued this legacy of using segmented color theory in order to design languages. If you want to look at not FFG, I'm always happy to talk about CD Projekt Red's Gwent, a game that starts as an adaptation of Condottiere in The Witcher 3. And they produce factions, so Skellige, Nilfgaard, Monsters, Northern Realms, Scoia'tael, and then I think the last one's Syndicate? I can't remember the 6th faction because it came out after I stopped playing. And if you go back to a 2016 PAX West panel, Raphael Jacqui and Damien Monnier, the designers of Gwent at the time, talk about Gwentception, about imagining Gwent through the lens of previous games like Magic the Gathering that they grew up playing. So something else is happening here, right? Magic has been around for so long at this point that not only are you getting people who are responding as designers, but you are getting people who grew up as players of Magic who are then moving on to design games. And this means they're picking up the language that they have and changing it. You can look at Lorcana, the Ravensburger Disney game. This also uses inks, and the inks have colors, and certain characters are tied to the colors, and mechanics are tied to colors. So we've sort of adopted this industrial language. And this is really what I want to leave you with in terms of the 2000s, right? What Rosewater and the folks who help him build at WotC, I'm really talking about one person, but this is a team that's working over dozens of years, right? It's an industrial linguistic system. Like, it adapts culture into math. And this is how cards are built today, right? It marries the ordinality of old playing cards along with the sort of aesthetic features of face cards, and it produces a much wider range of cards. Magic has upwards of, I think, 22,000 unique cards, 40,000 if you count reprints, and other games since have been also massive. I think like Arkham has about like 4,000 or 5,000 cards as well. These games get big very fast. So with that in mind, I want to talk about Runeterra, because I've been talking about cards this whole time. So I need to talk about the fact that Riftbound, as a hybrid game, is not only indebted to card games, it's indebted to the lore of League of Legends, the world of Runeterra, which has developed in the past 15 years or so from the original, early League of Legends concepts, which are kind of insane, into something that has an enormous amount of lore, short stories, multiple video games, arcane aesthetics, like aesthetic books, art books about arcane, and so on. And the game itself, to me, I think is this marriage between this world and also the people I'm talking about who grew up on Magic. So people like Paulo Vitor d'Amorosa on the left, or Steve Rubin Zoo, who designed a bunch of characters for Legends of Runeterra. So it's Magic players coming to the world of Runeterra. And when you open up the world of Runeterra, you get to see a map, right? It's not unlike a map of Eastern Europe or the Mediterranean that I showed you earlier. And what happens is the regions in Runeterra are fairly separate. So you have Demacia, Freljord, Nexus, Ionia, Bilgewater, Shadow Isles, Ishtal, Shurima, Targon, and Piltover and Zon, which are like twin cities. If you've watched Arcane, you know a lot about Piltover and Zon. You maybe know a little bit about Noxus. You might not know much else, but if you've been playing the game for a long time, you might know these regions quite well. And the thing that they do, like Magic, is that each one of these regions is treated as a stand-in for real-world cultures. And I'm about to butcher this because I have to do it in like one slide per culture. It's a lot more complicated than this because each character draws on different motifs. But these regions are by and large inspired by real-world cultures. So if you look at the original regions that released with Runeterra at launch, have Ionia on the top left, Noxus on the bottom left, the Shadow Isles, Freljord, Piltover and Zon, Bilgewater at the top right, and then Demacia at the bottom right. And these are locales. They're like countries, they're like worlds. 6 of these were in development during closed beta, and then Bilgewater gets added at release. So let's talk about them. All right. Noxus, which is one of the most recognizable ones, has this incredible like megalithic structure motif. It's super militaristic. It's very Roman inspired. It has Soviet Union and Eastern European coded characters and institutions. And it also has kind of like I would say, a sprinkling of Mongolian flavor in some of its characters that are more from the past. So it has a visual design, and you can imagine that there will be certain kinds of themes that are attached to it. If you look at Demacia, you get the same thing. Clearly Western Europe, but generally I would say France, especially France, but also England to a certain extent. So it's very Western European, right? Very Cliffs of Dover, but also Paris. And this is where you have characters with French accents, like the Laurent family and people like Fiora. You get the Freljord, which I think is commonly associated with like Nordic or Viking culture, but also features things like the Notai tribe on the right, who are inspired by Inuit peoples. So you get like that kind of flavor as well that's tied to ice and ice magic and the north and living in harsh environments. You get Ionia, which I would say is a mishmash of South, Southeast, and East Asian cultures. This has an enormous amount of Buddhist imagery, Shintoism. It has like Shaolin monks. It has ninjas. It has samurai. It has everything you can imagine, and also like folklore and folkloric animals like foxes. So you get this kind of color, right? Which is very much, I think, is one of the more recognizable ones. You get Bilgewater, get your pirates, your Caribbean themes, but also Polynesian, and also a little bit of the H.P. Lovecraft, like deep sea monster flavor. Stuff like Nagakaboros is very much like inspired by Dagon. So you get like your pirate locale, your seafaring locale. And then Piltover and Zon, I would say, mostly inspired by the Industrial Revolution writ large, but especially Victorian England. Lots of cogworks, lots of class divide, lots of smokestacks. And if you watch Arcane, you get to see this a ton. I think Arcane has sort of pushed the lore forward and made it a bit more cutting edge, but you get a good idea of what that looked like. And on top of these regions, you have one that I'm a personal fan of, the Shadow Isles. And the Shadow Isles are nominally, I think, inspired by the Gothic writ large, but also by Spain. Camavor, especially, like the precursor to Shadow Isles, I think is very much coded as Spain, and also some Gothic Germany. So these are sort of your 7 start regions for the game. These would be, in Magic parlance, your colors. And then we get 3 more over the course of a year or so. So we get Targon, Shurima, and Vandal City. And Targon, I don't know how much like I need to say this. Targon is my favorite region, tied with the one after this. It's the one based around Greek myths. It's all about mountains and seafaring peoples, not seafaring, mountain dwelling peoples, and especially like very much based around Spartan culture and sun myth worshipping. So you could say there's like a tinge of Zoroastrianism. Shurima is kind of the opposite to this, very much coded in relation to ancient Egypt, but also the Middle East and North African regions as well. A lot about animal-headed demigods coming back after millennia and sort of the Nile and the bounty of Shurima. So, big Azir fans, so that tracks. And then finally, you have Bandle City, which is the sort of fairy tale region with the small yordles, a place that's supposed to exist outside of the material world, very much inspired by the German pastoral and fairy tales. So like burg life, but also very cute. And these 10 regions, followed by an 11th, like nondescript, some heroes are from no region, is sort of the Runeterra original scaffold for flavor design. So this is how you get characters like Vladimir. And I want to use Vladimir as a sort of example given to show you what I mean. So Vladimir, like many cards in the original Legends of Runeterra, illustrated by Six More Vodka, a studio, showcases the character Vladimir, who lives in Noxus. So he's kind of like a Eastern European vampire living in the Eastern European locale. You get a lot of red-coated stuff. His mechanics are all about blood and healing off of taking damage. And with Vladimir, you get the Crimson Circle. So the Crimson Circle are like apprentice hemomancers. So they live in Noxus. They're blood mages. They're kind of punky, but they're also kind of Eastern European. And these 4 characters are split across 4 different cards. So you can tell they're all from Noxus because they have a Noxus symbol at the top right. They're all like built as a cohesive whole because of the artwork that you can see on Crimson Awakener. And then they have mechanics that all work together. So they have a power and a health, I think, if memory serves, how the words were, what they were called in Legends of Runeterra. And then things like Crimson Curator generates other Crimson units. So this, I think, is pretty indicative of how ordinality and the kind of magic design that you saw in the 2000s gets applied to Legends of Runeterra. Things are tied to colors. The colors are tied to heroes. Mechanics are tied to colors. And so you get like this wonderful triangle structure of hero, faction, and flavor that all like creates the space that these cards exist in. And they make a ton of sense. And they're all kind of supposed to be played together to a certain extent. This is what I would call a marriage of function and form, right? So colors are not only things that contain culture and can interact with it, kind of like they do in Magic, where you can have like red Egypt or red Greece. They are straight up cultures. This is one of the things that made Legends of Runeterra so visually compelling, is that it was very easy to have a kind of card or a deck of cards or a hero that you identified with, and that it had a cohesive aesthetic. This also meant that you could very much tie, like the mechanical color pie that I was talking about a bit earlier, certain mechanics or certain ways of playing to certain cultures. So you could say like Noxus is an aggressive culture. It has to have access to mechanics that are aggressive. So you get like a secondhand marriage of culture and function. How do certain peoples behave? To me, this is one of the strongest parts about Runeterra, but it's also the risk. The risk of strong affiliations, and one of the critiques that was levied at the game was that it can become very prescriptive. Things were on rails. If you played Vladimir, you knew what to play and which cards were part of it. And I think it's a valid criticism, but it's also going to produce one of the aspects that I struggle with aesthetically in Riftbound. So it's time to talk about it. I think Riftbound is interesting because it's a second shot at a game. Dave Guskin has worked on Legends of Runeterra, is now the lead on Riftbound, and Riftbound reuses a lot of the art produced by Six More Vodka and Envar Studio and Kudos. I think it's Kudos Entertainment. A lot of it was part of Legends of Runeterra. I think this was a way to cut on costs and also something to get the game out of the gate. And for the reasons I'm going to talk about, I hope that it's something that will change over time. So if you look at Riftbound has 6 colors or domains, and the domains are nominally attached to, terms. Fury, calm, body, mind, order, and chaos. And these are opposites, right? Fury and calm are never together. Neither are body and mind or order and chaos, for now at least. The alternate runes also give you a little bit more of an expression of what these things are. So for example, like Fury being an explosion or Calm being a tree. These things tell you certain things about how the colors are meant to be presented, right? We're not at like 140 sets and multiple like articles talking about flavor design, but I think this already indicates to you like a certain way that these things are meant to be presented. Dave Guskin has talked about it. So if you look at it, the 6 colors have certain kinds of mechanics and flavor. And this is a bit of a confusion for me. If you look at something, let's say like Fury, right? Red. It has the words aggression, conquer, recklessness, and damage. Aggression and recklessness are thematic words, right? They're flavor. Conquer and damage are mechanical ones. So to me, there are ways, for example, where you could be aggressive, but aggression would not only be tied to red, it might be something that is in tandem with yellow or purple. So this is just to say, like, there's already a bit of a mismatch here of like certain things that are, I think, are matched together and maybe shouldn't be. I say this as somebody who was not in those design meetings, so take it with a grain of salt. But you get an idea that they're trying to work in the same tradition as a lot of other studios who have been inspired by Magic, inspired by each other, and have been producing card games for the better part of 20 years. If you look at something like Jinx, right? Jinx is a legend that is red and purple. And the loose cannon ability tells you to draw if you don't have a lot. So the kind of recklessness and aggression is matched with purple's propensity to discard cards. So there's like a thematic to mechanical match. Where this gets a bit weird for me is when I look at the cards. So as somebody who comes from Legends of Runeterra, I have no issue with Flame Chompers and Kemtech Enforcer, cards that were originally, I think, part of the same archetype. But there are things here that don't match. It's like Raging Soul is a card from Shadow Isles, Brazen Buccaneer is a card from Bilgewater, as is a Traveling Merchant. Undercover Agent is not tagged as Piltover or Zon, but it might be. And then Scrapyard Champion is a card that was, I think, a Noxus and Bandle City card. So mechanically, this package works quite well, and I would argue like 1/3 of it makes sense visually. So like Flame Chompers, Jinx Rebel, and Kemtech Enforcer. Maybe Undercover Agent if you want to be generous, like half. But then there's stuff in here that doesn't work. So then I say, okay, well, if instead of looking at flavor design through these cards, and I do want to stress that, like, I think the match of the legends by and large does work. Like Jinx as purple red works for me, the sort of like graffiti art in the background works for me, and even cards like the Rebel card, which I think is based on design from Arcane, works as well. But then I look at Fury cards, and then things get like really weird. Because we have a lot of Noxus cards, so Legion Rearguard, Noxus Hopeful, and Blazing Scorcher are from Rearguard, are from Noxus. But then we have Magma Worm, a card that's from Freljord, and not a card that I would say is necessarily like a card that I associate with aggression. Although it is aggressive looking, the way that it's worded, I can be in or out on. Cleave works for me. But then we have things like Pouty Poro, and Pouty Poro is not a card that I think works for me in red. All this to say, there's some mismatch in terms of like they're trying to jam a lot of different regions that have their own flavor into one color. Red, I think, is still reasonably doing well. When I look at something like purple, then I'm like completely confused because there are things from Shurima, like Psy Scout. There's Bilgewater cards like Shipyard Skulker and Madden Marauder, which do make sense for me. But then there's Zonite Bouncer, Kane. Kane himself does make sense as a Chaos card, but Ionia is a bit complicated here. So there's a bit of a difficult marriage between what the regions were in Runeterra and the fact that the art remains and people have attachments about those and the way that system works currently. And I think there's no card that showcases this better than Deadbloom Wanderer for me. Deadbloom Wanderer in Runeterra was a Shadow Isles card. It was a super defensive card. And it was a card that was relatively small, right? 2 health and 3 might is not, or 3 attack, is not a big unit. Deadbloom Predator, on the other hand, is arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest threatening unit inside of Legends of Runeterra. Currently, it is like the most played large unit and has become synonymous, I think, with the body, the color orange. And if you look at the flavor text, the souls of those who died and fulfilled coalesce into a form to sate those hungers. It can kind of make sense, right? A lot of different souls are inside of one creature. It's a big creature. The problem I have is if I look at the card for Deadbloom Wanderer, it gets like really weird for me because you can kind of see the size of certain blades in the back and the plants that are coming out of its feet. These are not like tree sized. So the size of the creature aesthetically and the way that like the art works is not really doing what it needs to do, right? It's mismatched. And if I take a look back and I think about Shadow Isles as a locale in Legends of Runeterra, the colors all generally work. You might have something a bit more pushed, like Nocturne, who is, purple and black. But in general, you have that teal ghost fire that comes from the Ruination that's everywhere in these cards. But then if I think about body, I have this problem where nothing is matched. In fact, many different things have entirely different color schemes. There's no harmony aesthetically between the cards and the color and how they're supposed to work. Now, this is a minor gripe, but I think it does contribute to the game having a bit of, what I would call in World of Warcraft, when you're leveling your character, a clown fiesta syndrome, where like everything is a bit mismatched. And that might be unkind to the designers, but it's because I love the game so much. And I really think this is something that should be hammered out. I do think that cards like Set and Kiana and Misfortune and Lee Sin make more sense in the color than something like Warwick, a card that I understand why it's in body, but at least this art of Warwick really does not work for it. And Deadloom Wanderer is like a sore point for me in general. So what I want to leave you with here is that this is an issue that we call ludonarrative dissonance. You might have heard about this in games journalism, or if you've ever taken games about classes. This is where there is a felt mismatch between the narrative, the cultural or the aesthetic elements, and the gameplay, right? So body is telling you it's supposed to be one thing, but the art is telling you it's another thing. And what we're really looking for, and what has been the dominant paradigm, I think, for Fantasy Flight Games and Wizards of the Coast, is something called resonance. And I'm not going to talk about it today because that is like a whole other discussion. But in general, what you want is to match what your game objects are telling the players that they are to what they look like and what they feel like. There's a fantastic 2016 Mark Rosewater talk at GDC. Yeah, it's the GDC 2016 talk called 20 Years, 20 Lessons, where that is like the primary document that we have for how resonance works in card games. But if you would like to read more, you can just read my dissertation, which is free. Yeah, so I'm not trying to be a spoil sport. I think that Runeterra is or Riftbound is a very well-designed game in terms of the color split and kind of what's attached to what color, but it's going through growing pains. Part of that is the colors need to find out what they're really about, and there's some discussion about mechanics. But I think the aesthetic component of this is also important and likely to become a subject of discussion as like skins are added as alternate arts as well. If you would like to learn more about how to study card games or Magic or Resonance, I have some recommendations for you. So the Journal of Analog Game Studies, which is free and open access, has Nathan Altus's Playing Card Platform article up for free. Also Jan Schvel's Platform Studies, Computational Essentialism, and Magic the Gathering. These are amazing pieces. I forgot to write it, but Jan's piece is from 2017. And then there's the Beyond the Deck Critical Essays on Magic the Gathering, edited by Shelley Jones, which I think has like multiple discussions about Magic as a competitive scene, as a game, and also an interview with Mark Rosewater by Aaron Trammell out of UC Irvine. And then finally, what I would recommend is, if you are interested in this, my dissertation is, I think, a pretty cool jumping on point, although it is like a 400-page brick of reading about Assassin's Creed and Magic the Gathering and how they simulate classical antiquity in Egypt and Greece. All of these are free, and there will be links to all of these, or actually, I'm sorry, I should belay that. Beyond the Deck, I don't think is free, but it may be available at one of your local libraries, or if you are somebody who is in a university, I'm pretty sure you can ask your university library to get a copy of it. It's also not super expensive, so if you are so inclined, I would recommend buying it. But everything else that I've talked about today will be inside of the video description at the bottom. So hopefully this has been an interesting topic. It's one I'm passionate about and I teach about consistently. I think one day I will do like a bigger version of this with some movie stuff, but I need to wrap my head around video editing a little bit more before I move on to that. So with that said, I want to thank you. This has been like a pleasure to edit, but it got much bigger than I expected it to. It took a lot of time to put the slides together as well. And next episode, I'm going to be talking about Azir. But yeah, I'm happy to always talk about flavor and thematic design in card games and in games in general. Have a nice one, and I will see you later this week.